So I decided to do a video on something that's been occurring quite a lot lately in our society and has been getting a lot worse. And that is the whole notion of SJWs and this behavior that I'd like to call victimhood syndrome. Now, victimhood syndrome is basically when a traumatic event has happened to somebody or a very negative experience, and that's something that they carry with them their whole lives. And it's understandable when you have something like PTSD or you have another type of mental health issue or disorder, and this type of thing can be reoccurring in your life. Now, this is something that I have dealt with in my life, and it's something that you have to overcome because victimhood syndrome is basically where you're reliving these experiences over and over again. So, for example, let's say that you were bullied, and so now you bring that with as a life experience, and you think that maybe the littlest thing is against you. So it's basically you versus the world, and everybody's against you. You look at the world through a filter where you feel that everybody is working against you. So this usually involves someone who was not able to work through their issues and work through this traumatic experience that they've had. And so they get into this rut where they portray themselves as the victim all the time. It doesn't matter what it is. They always see themselves as some kind of victim no matter what happens. Someone says a joke, if someone's critical of them, if they just take everything the wrong way, it's always everybody else's fault and everybody's out to get them. And I think that this also applies to SJWs or what they call social justice warriors. Now, I'm not saying that there are not oppressions that exist in society. There are. And especially for this, especially the way we live now under this system, there is a lot of oppression that is happening. But when you get into this paranoid state where you think that everything is against you and everything is meant to insult or offend, along the same lines is that more than ever today, people are offended. So they're offended at everything. You can't even say a joke to somebody without them getting offended. I think one great example of this is today's feminism. And today's feminism has become quite toxic and abusive. And it's more about women being more superior to men than actual equality. Because when women were out marching in the 1960s, that was about equality. But now feminism is about bashing men. It's about targeting men and labeling men as misogynist and sexist and abusive. And there's no doubt that those type of men exist and are a problem. But to come out and say that if you're not a feminist or you don't support a certain agenda, then you're a sexist. And it's quite ridiculous. And I think that a lot of feminists now are a part of the SJWs, are part of this victimhood culture, this victimhood syndrome, where you can't even criticize somebody without being told that you're being abusive or a troll or a shill or some kind of label to criticize somebody. The most recent example, I would argue, would be with the new Captain Marvel movie. And I will be doing a review on Captain Marvel, but I will say right off the bat that a speech that Brie Larson made, and she is the actor who plays Captain Marvel, apparently told an audience that everybody that doesn't like her movie are angry white dudes. And what does that even mean? Why would she say something like that? Well, first of all, she has no evidence to suggest that a whole segment of the population doesn't like her movie because they're white and because they're male. And sure, there are men out there that are very obnoxious and will say obnoxious things. But to say something like that is just utterly absurd. And you know what? I'm going to say that I didn't think the Captain Marvel movie was that good. I think it was enjoyable to a certain extent, but I think that it wasn't really that great. Now, does that mean that I'm a troll because I didn't like the film? Am I now an angry white male because I didn't like the film? No. That's obviously absurd, and anyone who thinks like that is irrational and doesn't know what they're talking about. So, why is that? Why is it that if I don't like Captain Marvel, I'm a troll? If I don't like the Ghostbusters movie from 2016, I'm a sexist troll. Why is that? Well, it has to do with toxic feminism. It has to do with victimhood syndrome. You're basically name called, and you can't even give a rebuttal to an argument. They handcuff you. They won't let you even respond. So that's the problem with SJWs. That's the problem with victimhood syndrome. And feminism is just an example of that. And there's all kinds of other different examples out there. But the main lines is that if you don't agree with a certain agenda, if you don't agree with a certain way of life, that doesn't mean that you're a bigot. It doesn't mean that you're an angry white male. And it doesn't mean that also being white is a bad thing. Okay? And I've heard this about, and I've seen all this. I've seen all the propaganda and the rhetoric out there about this type of thing. And it's this type of abuse that occurs in this new culture that's been created. So when you have somebody with a victimhood syndrome, they will blame everybody else for their problems. It's never their fault. It's always somebody else. Now, don't get me wrong. If somebody's been traumatized and abused and has gone through some terrible experiences, it's a terrible thing. And I wish people like that nothing but the best. Myself, I've gone through traumatic experiences when I was younger and have had a lot of negative experiences in my life, which, like I'd mentioned before, I myself have participated in victimhood syndrome. And that's why I think that I can speak a little more to this, because I've done it myself and I have seen the world through a negative lens where I think everybody's out to get me, and that loss of trust. But that loss of trust was resulted in those bad experiences. Once I looked at healing myself and changing my life, was I able to step back and see the type of behavior that I had, and to really look at my life overall and how I was presenting myself. And I think that in today's culture, we have this mental illness and this culture of victimhood almost being normalized. Like, it's okay to act like this. And yes, there are people that are mentally ill, and myself, I've gone through mental health issues, and I've dealt with that. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to resolve this? What are we doing to look at both sides? Now, there are lots of scenarios where people are bullied and people are socially excluded and ganged up against. That, I've seen that too. And it happens all the time. This entire culture of being offended at everything, and it's down to a number of things. First of all, because people are not taught certain social skills on how to deal with criticism, how to have that confidence to argue back, or to just be confident enough that you can defend yourself and you can be an advocate for yourself, but not in a negative way. Because people that are easily offended often resort to passive-aggressive techniques. And I've seen it. I've seen it everywhere. In family, I've seen it at the workplace, I've seen it at school. People who do not have confidence are passive-aggressive. An example of passive-aggressiveness is when you're angry at somebody, but you badmouth them behind their back to other people, or you intentionally try to sabotage them, or set them up for failure in some way, shape, or form, but never actually confront the person that you have an issue with. All you're doing is stepping around the issue and never directly resolving the issue with that person. Bullies do this, and passive-aggressive people do this. People that have no confidence, and people who are so easily offended and they have such a huge ego that they have to defend it at all costs. So again, there's nothing wrong with defending a certain point of view, of looking at certain oppressions in our society. And yes, racism still exists. Sexism still exists. Mental illness and the poor is a massive issue. There are a lot of issues that are in our world, and there's nothing wrong with bringing them up and fighting for those, but it's when you paint everything with the same brush and everybody's a bad guy and everybody is out to offend you, that is when it's a problem. Because victimhood syndrome is a mental illness. And if somebody is doing that, then it is clear that they haven't moved past that issue in their lives. And it's something that they need to do. And if you're somebody who's watching this video right now that has not moved past these issues, it's something that needs attention to. And that's something that is very hard to do. I've made several videos dealing with this particular subject of my past of being bullied and dealing with mental health issues. And it's really something that you have to take in your own hands. And remember that if you resort to withdrawal and to getting under that comfort zone of, and it is a security blanket, it is a negative coping mechanism to suggest that nothing is ever your fault and that it is always somebody else to blame. There are cases where there are people to blame, but when you are resorting to never taking responsibility for your actions and for your behavior, then that is a mental illness. And it's something that needs to be addressed. And this is the type of issue that is surrounding SJWs and is surrounding people that use victimhood syndrome. To get down to it, it is being a forever victim. Always playing the victim role. Even when somebody is bullying somebody else, they take the victim role, never taking responsibility for their actions. This goes hand in hand with narcissism and a sociopath. If you want to check out my videos on how to deal with a sociopath, I got 3 parts, 3 videos that I did. Please check those out because it goes into exactly dealing with sociopaths, who sociopaths are, and I provide some examples, my own personal examples of what I've dealt with. So it is important to distinguish between these two things of standing up for an important issue or defending a certain way of life versus looking at the world through a filter where you're always the victim. Anyways, guys, that's all I'm going to say about this. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Do you have your own personal stories of dealing with victimhood or seeing somebody else portraying themselves as the victim all the time? Remember that you can follow me on social media, on Twitter at the Andrew K Channel, as well as on Facebook at the Andrew K Channel. You can also email me at theandrewkchannel@hotmail.com. If you like this video, make sure that you give it a like. And if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe. Keep it locked on the Andrew K Channel.